Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing so well, and I hope you're in good form. And I'm thrilled you've joined me tonight for another fabulous story, because there's nothing that beats a good old story. And I hope you're going to go and get yourself something lovely and warm to drink. A hot cup of cocoa, perhaps. Or if you're living in a cooler part of the world, or you just fancy something refreshing, perhaps something effervescent and sparkling. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, a soft shaft of sunlight stealthily stole its way through the crack in the curtain, casting its light across the face of the young woman, whose long blonde hair lay sprawled over the dipped dent in the goose-down pillow. Nola Miller opened one eye, followed by another. Her eyes were heavily congealed with sleep, but the intrusive sunlight, strategically aimed on her pillow, caused her to squint from its invasively bright glare. She found herself looking up at the ceiling, and noted its ornate rococo twirls. She realized to her horror that this was not her own apartment. Where the heck was she? The cruel blast of sunshine blow-dried her face with its warm fingers. She noticed her head was thumping violently with the drumming beats of a headache. Her parched throat was dry. There was a bitter, acrid taste in the back of her mouth, the foul oral infusion you often get from overindulging in alcohol, while her tongue felt thick and furry. Where was she? The full horror that she was not lying safely curled up in her cosy bed at home filled her with dread. What the hell had she done? It was when she glanced down at the gloriously crisp Egyptian cotton sheets of the luxurious sleigh bed she was lying in that her worst, most dreadful fears were confirmed. Her head spun around to observe the lumpy form lying in bed next to her, the long, lean, naked body of a man with honey-coloured skin and curly blonde locks. A haunting recollection of this man came flooding back into her mind. His name was Timothy. She had met him only last night at the bar in town, and enjoyed a few drinks with him, but she remembered nothing beyond that. It seemed her inhibitions had been crushed, washed away. She must have returned home with this random stranger to his apartment. She glanced down in horror at her immodest body, wrapped in a long sheet. She was totally naked, and her beleaguered clothes were lying in abandoned sorry heaps across the floor, in tangled puddles along with the stranger's clothes. Oh my God, she thought, I've slept with this man, and I don't even remember the events of the previous evening. I guess I must have got so bladdered with all those champagne cocktails I knocked back. I must have really overdone it. Nola knew she had a weakness when she had one drink. It always seemed to lead to another, and another, and another, and now it had directed her straight to a stranger's bed. The sense of self-loathing, disgust, and revulsion she felt towards herself rushed through her like the furiously angry water jutting over the rocks of an obstreperous stream. If her father could see her right now, she thought, he'd feel so much disappointment, such dreadful shame. No daughter of his should demean herself like this. She was no floozy. Her father would have described the folly that she had clearly got caught up in now to be meaningless under the sun, and she would agree with him wholeheartedly with that. Her father was right about so many things. She could almost see him shaking his shiny bald head, looking at her through his blue wizened eyes, and saying, "Nola, Nola, I'm disappointed in you. You're better than this." She had been raised to be a good, dignified Catholic girl, and girls like her should have some self-respect. In the hazy whirl of her confusion, Nola tried to bring the estranged pieces of the previous evening back together again, like a jumbled jigsaw puzzle. She had gone on to Tinder, a dating website, as her friend Alison had persuaded her it was a great idea. Why did she ever listen to Alison? Her well-meaning friend's crazy ideas always ended up going pear-shaped in the end, and invariably getting her into heaps of trouble. "Nola, you've been moping around for weeks on end after you and Freddie split up. You need to have fun, girl. Let your hair down, for goodness sake. Blow caution to the wind." Yes, she thought, I needed to have some fun, But I did not want this to happen. A good time, yes, but warming somebody else's bed up had been the furthest thing on her mind. There was something so soullessly empty and vacuous about lying in a stranger's bed, smelling the unfamiliar scent of their aftershave, and feeling like a goldfish that had been thrown into another pond and had become disorientated and confused. "I've got to get out of here," she thought, as all of a sudden she felt like a claustrophobic caged bird that desperately needed to escape the confines of its cage. It would seem unfamiliar territory, can close in on you, and drain away your sense of comfort like a blood-sucking leech. She tiptoed awkwardly towards the curtain and peeked out of the apartment window. She was in a posh brownstone neighbourhood, with tall lofty oak trees fringing each side of the pavement. The sleepy street was bask in the restful first light of the early morning, steeped in a tranquil silence. She had no idea where she was, but the urgent need to leave the apartment before the stranger in the bed next to her rose from his peaceful slumber was all-consuming. This would be the last time she ever went on Tinder. This could never happen to her again. She closed the curtains fully to block out the sunlight and tiptoed across the wooden parquet floor, in her shameful self-conscious nakedness, between the puddles of clothes that looked like water lilies on a brown lake. She felt like a frog, bounding between them, hopping from one pile of clothes to another. Finally she found her dishevelled, crumpled Levi jeans that stank of stale cigarette smoke. She hurriedly wiggled into them and threw on her sweatshirt, but as the chafing fabric brushed against her skin, she was terribly afraid that the sounds would wake the sleeping man. She grabbed her purse, glancing briefly at the slumped figure, still lying in bed, emitting a low snore. "Please God, don't you dare wake up," she thought, as the embarrassed awkwardness of meeting the stranger in the cold, cruel light of day, after the hazy blur of the previous night, would not be a comfortable experience at all. Nola took in a deep breath, straightened her back, and clandestinely tiptoed through the apartment, wondering if she could easily escape. The front door opened seamlessly. She closed it discreetly behind her. Further down the street, as luck would have it, she managed to hail down a taxicab to her own apartment. She pulled out her cell phone to call Alison. She'd kill that woman. She had got her into the sticky mess. It was all her fault. "Hello," came Alison's sluggishly sleepy voice. "Why are you calling me so early? I'm so tired. Do you realise what time it is?" she yawned. "Did you have a good time last night? Your date? He was really handsome, wasn't he?" Nola growled. "Don't you ever do anything to me like this again. Do you understand, Alison? This was your crazy idea, for me to hook up on Tinder with this guy. I ended up waking up in his bed." "That's good, isn't it?" came Alison's voice. "So you had a good time then? I'm so glad. That was the whole idea, wasn't it? Hopefully now you can move on from Freddie. Stop mooching around the place, feeling sorry for yourself." "Are you even listening to a word I'm saying, Alison? Thanks to your crazy, nonsensical idea, I ended up bladdered. And then I ended up waking up in the strange man's bed and creeping out of his apartment. I feel like a cheap slut, thanks to you. I've never felt more humiliated in my entire life. This is not for me, Alison. I don't do this kind of thing." "Oh, for goodness sake, Nola, stop being so hard on yourself. Of course you're not a slut. You just had a good time. That's all that counts. Tinder is great that way, when consenting adults meet each other and have a good time. Nothing wrong with that. Everyone does it. Quit acting like Mother Teresa." "Alison, waking up in a perfect stranger's bed after an evening of drinking and not remembering a bloody thing is not my idea of fun. You were at the bar. Why didn't you stop me leaving with this guy? Surely you must have seen I was in no state to make any cognitive decisions. I was obviously completely intoxicated. The scariest thing is I don't remember a bloody thing. After those potent cocktails, nothing at all. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is? How would you feel waking up in a perfect stranger's bed and you have no memory of how you even got there? It's not funny. I blame you for this, Alison. This was your ludicrous idea."
But you look like you were having a wonderful time, Nola. You were throwing yourself all over that Timothy fellow. I thought you were quite taken by each other. I had no idea you weren't enjoying yourself. You looked incredibly happy. You couldn't stop giggling. Alison, are you really that dim? Do you know nothing about alcohol? It can make a chair with a wobbly leg look drop-dead gorgeous. But I'd have rather woken up with a wobbly chair in my bed than a perfect stranger. At least I'd still have my dignity intact. I have no idea what happened between me and this stranger. No idea at all. But I can only imagine. And the idea fills me with dread. But you liked his profile on Tinder. He was so handsome. If you must know, even though his name was Timothy Cox, his picture on Tinder was not the same one. The man I met last night was better looking than the man on the photograph in Tinder. He said his secretary put up the wrong photograph of his friend by mistake. Sounds a bit fishy to me. I'd never ever want to see him again. A man who takes advantage of you like this when you're half cut is certainly no gentleman. I suppose you're right, said Alison. I'm sorry, Nola. I got you into this sticky mess, but I had no idea that you weren't into him. 2 weeks later, Nola feels slightly nervous as the taxi approaches the large Georgian manor house, nestled in the heart of the South Carolina countryside, the perfect venue for her sister's wedding. She was arriving today for the pre-wedding dress rehearsal, which would be followed by a beautiful evening meal spent with her family and the groom's family that was to be served in the main dining hall. The following afternoon would be the wedding that would take place on the viridescent lawns of this illustrious property under an arched pergola covered with bountiful climbing roses, where her sister would be married by Father MacArthur, a very good friend of the family. This would soon be followed by a grandiose reception in the marquee, where no expense had been spared, as the groom's parents had deep pockets, and they would be footing the entire bill. There would be over 150 people in attendance. Nola had almost despised her sister for all her lucky breaks that had flooded her life with a tsunami of opportunity that never came her way. Izzy was one of those people that was annoyingly, serendipitously, always at the right place at the right time, for fate to fill her arms with its gleeful, golden rewards, whereas Nola was the one more likely to step in the dog turd she failed to see on the pavement, or to attract that infuriating dog on the street who would dash over to her and begin humping her leg with a frenzied passion, to the amusement of all the spectators. And yes, that had happened over a plethora of times. Nothing like that ever happened to Izzy. Everything about her sister's life just flowed seamlessly. Nola was always the one who ended up venturing down the rocky paths and precariously high bluffs from which she could so easily have lost her footing and come crashing down with a mighty wallop. But it would seem Izzy's life was like a clear day spent relaxing on a turquoise ocean, where the sail from her boat never even got remotely ruffled by the wind. Why was it that some people just had it so good, while others struggled to get afloat and limp from one day to the next? Izzy had always annoyingly received top grades when she was a child, and had boyfriends who had always won her father's approval, whereas by contrast some of the bedraggled boys that Nola had brought back home over the years looked like something the cat had dragged in. There was Eddie Estelle, for example, with his carefree manner and dopey look, who looked like he hung around on the beach all day, riding the waves on his surfboard, and beyond that had absolutely nothing to say. Then there had been that boyfriend, what was his name? Oh yes, Carlton Hefner, who had joined an obscure heavy metal band, wore his hair around his face in a long brown crinkly frizz, a headband around his head, black clothes and piercings in every available orifice, who had auditioned over and over and over again for various record companies and had always been turned away. He was hanging on to an impossible, unattainable dream, like a koala bear on a eucalyptus tree. He had been rough around the edges and exciting to Nola, but his clamorous, blasting music had almost shattered her eardrums. Let's just say her father had not been impressed by any of her boyfriends. "Nola, why is it that you choose the most nonconformist men?" he'd say. "You would do well to take a leaf out of your sister's book. She is very discerning when it comes to her boyfriends." Izzy had sailed through life with boyfriends that every parent would be proud to embrace as a potential son-in-law. As Nola glances outside the taxi window, she wondered about this mysterious man her sister is going to marry, for she'd never had the pleasure to meet him. "I know I should have told you before, Nola, but we wanted to keep our relationship hush-hush," her sister explained. "We've been together for 2 years, and I'm hopelessly in love with him. He popped the question, Nola, on a glorious yacht in the Caribbean. So romantic it was. He's got very wealthy parents with old money. The family made their fortune from coal, you know. I can't believe we're getting married," she squealed in delight. "It's so wonderful. Oh, my God, I can't wait. He's only picked out the dream venue for us. His parents are paying for absolutely everything. It's a gorgeous manor house in the heart of South Carolina countryside. It's to die for. I'm going to feel like a princess on my wedding day. I can hardly wait, Nola." Nola felt a pang of jealousy twitching her throat. Her sister was getting married. As usual, at the end of her fishing line, she was pulling out a spectacular golden carp. When there was a tug at Nola's line, she always ended up with a shriveled-up fish the size of a new penny. Why was her sister always so fortunate? "I'm happy for you," she said, her voice sounding as flat as a bottle of champagne that had lost all its fizz. "Don't be like that, Nola." "All right, I'm sorry I never introduced you to him, but in truth he was reluctant to meet you guys until we were sure about our feelings for each other, if you understand." Nola did not understand or appreciate her sister's secrecy. It diminished their close bond. For a moment she felt like a complete outsider in her sister's life, as if she didn't know her at all. It was ironic they lived so close to each other in New York, and not once had her sister had the decency to mention her boyfriend. When Nola had inquired about her love life, she had been so nonchalant and evasive, when all the while she was engaged in a serious relationship. "How about Mum and Dad? I hope you managed to introduce him to them." "Oh, of course I have. It was over a month ago. You would have met him yourself then, but you came down with that unfortunate bout of chickenpox, if you remember." "Don't tell me," said Nola. "Mum and Dad thought the moon shone out of his backside. Was Dad licking his shoes like he did with all your other boyfriends?" "Oh, for goodness sake, Nola, what's got into you? If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were jealous. Of course Dad liked him. Mum loved him too. I mean, what's there not to like about golden honey skin, blonde hair, and the bluest eyes you could almost swim in? I have to pinch myself, Nola. I can't believe how lucky I am to be marrying this man. He's an up-and-coming art dealer, you know. Loaded, lives in a brownstone apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I'll be moving in there after we get married." "I'm happy for you, Izzy. Really I am. But I am annoyed that you never introduced me to him. In case you've forgotten, I'm your sister. You've made me feel very discluded in your life." "Don't be like this, Nola. It hasn't got anything to do with me, it's Piers. He's just a very private person who keeps himself to himself. But you'll meet him at the wedding. I know you're going to love him. I'd like you to be my maid of honour. I really would. So why don't you WhatsApp me your measurements? I'll get a stunning dress designed especially for you, and you're going to love it. I've decided to go with emerald green and white for the wedding. Won't that be perfect?" "Sounds lovely," said Nola bleakly. "Nola, I've just asked you to be my maid of honour, and you sound as if I've invited you to a funeral. Well, can you blame me for being upset, Izzy? This is the first time I've heard that you've got a boyfriend, and now you're getting married. Not even Mum and Dad even told me about this man of yours. Now you're inviting me to your wedding. I feel as if I've been flung around in a washing cycle. Forgive me if I'm trying to assimilate everything you're telling me, but it's come as a bolt out of the blue. But of course, I am delighted to be your maid of honour. Thanks for asking me. I appreciate that." The taxi finally parks outside the grandiose Georgian manor house. The silence interrupted by the gravelly voice of the taxi driver. $25.50, he says. "Keep the change," says Nola, thrusting some notes into his hand. The stunning, very stately-looking red brick building, with its impressive rigid symmetry, smiles back at her. The soft shadows of morning sunshine twinkle over the red-bricked walls, contrasting superbly with the white bricks that frame the large multi-pane sash windows and cornices. There is a side-gabled grey slate roof and a very elegant front door, framed by an archway and columns. Nola climbs rather reluctantly out of the taxi, removing her rather bedraggled wheel-along suitcase that had been scuffed from years of overuse from the taxi's trunk. The taxi soon leaves her behind, as it descends down the long gravel driveway rather gradually, until it is all but a minuscule dot on the landscape. Nola processes the prepossessing views that demand her attention like a glorious Monet painting. It would seem hiring a grand country manor house like this had not come cheap, for the house was sumptuously nestled among rolling viridescent quilts of sumptuous countryside that branched out into sweeping wood groves of tall, lofty trees. The sprawling front yard boasted pristine geometric hedges, white roses and blue delphiniums, that merrily danced through the flower beds in a blaze of colour, while cheerful hanging geraniums tumbled like laughter from red terracotta pots. Then in pride of place, proudly nuzzling the centre of the verdant lawn, was a fabulously swanky designer marquee that looked like an excellent piece of contemporary artwork. Then there were exquisite pieces of wicker furniture, luxuriously upholstered with plumped-up cushioning and vibrant scatter cushions strewn across the lawn for all the wedding guests to thoroughly enjoy. All of a sudden the front door of this mansion was ebulliently flung open, and Izzy came running across the lawn to greet her, squealing with delight, her arms outstretched. She reminded Nola of an Afghan hound, with the enthusiasm of a Jack Russell Terrier. She was wearing a cotton dress in black that looked eclectic and artsy, with a pair of trendy-looking leather sandals that snaked up her slender ankles in an elegant stringy design. She grabbed Nola and squeezed her tightly. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. This is so exciting. Let's get the butler over there to take your suitcase up to your room. I have got to introduce you to Piers. Oh my God, you're just going to love him. I think the two of you will get on so well." Nola felt like a little girl again, as her sister grabbed her by the hand enthusiastically, leading her through to the back of the mansion, where a small gathering of people were collected together in a convivial group, chatting around merrily under a large arched terrace overlooking a kidney-shaped swimming pool, drinking elegant cocktails. She could see her mother and dad, and then she found herself staring at a familiar face, and her blood turned cold. "Piers! Piers!" said Izzy excitedly, unable to suppress her childlike giggles. "This is my sister Nola, that I've been telling you all about. Nola, this is Piers." When Piers looked at Nola, he managed to suppress his shocked reaction. "Hello," he said, reaching out to shake her hand. "Delighted to meet you, Nola," he said, staring at her through his blue eyes. "Izzy has told me all about you." "Has she now?" said Nola sarcastically, managing an awkward giggle. "I hope it's been all good." "Oh, but of course. Izzy raves about her little sister." She couldn't believe that the man she was looking at right now was no other than her date from Tinder, Piers McStratton, who had hidden under the alias Timothy Cox. It would seem he had cunningly put on a fake profile and photograph on the Tinder website and got away with it. Nola had been shocked at the time that the man she had met bore no resemblance at all to his photograph, but as he was better looking than his profile, she hadn't raised any questionable brows. But now she realised that Piers McStratton was a rat. It was clear from the flicker of recognition in Piers's face that he was rattled to see Nola again, as she was to see him. Nola knew that Piers was nothing more than a cheat. The rest of the day went like a hazy blur for her. Her mind whirled all over the place with a conundrum of what she should do about this tumultuous situation that had the potential of blowing up in her face like a firecracker. Should she say something and let her sister marry a treacherous man who would ultimately end up breaking her heart? Sooner or later, his cheating would be discovered. And what if Izzy had children with this man, who ended up being raised in a broken home? The rehearsal dinner came and went, and the celebratory mood was festive, as everyone was on top form, and Nola's parents seemed as beguiled and dewy-eyed by their promising new son-in-law. Could they not see through the blonde hair and blue-eyed veneer? Were they that easily duped? Nola's boyfriends may not have been all that, but they weren't artfully manipulative and cunning like Izzy's future spouse. Oh, there you are, Nola dear. It's so good to see you. I'm so thrilled for our Izzy, her mother had told her. So incredibly thrilled. I've never ever seen her so radiant. Those two are hopelessly in love with each other. Piers is so terribly good for her. Did you see the huge engagement ring he had specially designed for her? Any fool can see he didn't skimp on the expense. That rock is enormous. Yes, it is quite a showstopper, isn't it? Nola agreed. Well, you know our Izzy. She always liked the finer things in life. I'm in no doubt that Piers will keep her in a manner that she's accustomed. Do you know anything about him, Mum? Asked Nola obsequiously. I mean, how do you know he's as decent as you claim? You've only met him once. Oh, goodness gracious, sweetheart. Listen to yourself. Quite the cynic, aren't you? Anyone can see he's a very good man. And if he makes Izzy happy, then what more can I ask for? If my daughter is happy, then I'm happy. Besides, from what I hear, he's a very successful art dealer. She turned to look at Nola earnestly. I'm only sad, dear, that you haven't met anyone special yourself, to sweep you off your feet like Izzy. Your sister's been very lucky in love, hasn't she, over the years? But with Piers, she's hit the jackpot. What a terribly charming man. Really quite the charmer. Where did they meet? Asked Nola. Now, that's a very good question, dear. I believe it was on some dating website. That's right, I think that's what it was. Tinder, I asked. Yes, they met on Tinder. It's rather an amusing story, really. Piers put up a fake profile, would you believe it? When your sister met him, she found herself staring at a completely different man to whom she was expecting, with a different name as well. Of course he told her his real name, that he didn't want to put up his real details on the dating site, which is understandable for a man of his caliber. As he put it to your sister, he likes to be ex-directory. He doesn't want his real details getting spread across the World Wide Web, and who can blame him for that? Let's just say he's a very shrewd man. Nola felt quite nauseous when she returned to bed that night. The evening had swept by so fast, and it would seem that Piers had been casting her worried looks all evening. Nola hadn't been able to eat much at dinner, and had fiddled with her food. She suspected her parents thought she was suffering from a touch of the green-eyed monster. She had overheard her mother saying to her dad, "Have you seen how subdued Nola was this evening? She hasn't been herself, barely said a word, and didn't eat much food, I have to tell you. I think it's very hard on our daughter to see her sister Izzy so happy, having found the quintessential love of her life, when her own personal relationships with men have all ended up scrambled, rather like scrap metal." "Well, it's understandable, isn't it, in the circumstances, that she would be envious," came her father's voice. "I mean, if I was a woman, I'd marry Piers myself. He ticks all the right boxes, does he not? Poor Nola. She's never been very lucky in love, has she? I think she was quite taken by Piers. I couldn't help but notice her casting him surreptitious glances all evening. Oh, how I wish we could set her up with someone nice. But you know Nola, she doesn't have a good track record in choosing the right men. We've been introduced to some sorry sights over the years. Remember that dopey surfer kid? Too dreadful he was." Nola did not need to listen to her parents discuss the sorry state of her love life, so with deflated spirits she returned to her bedroom suite. She slipped into her pyjamas and stared around the gorgeous room, with its luxurious four-poster bed, along with the opulent ornate walnut furnishings brushed with Rococo influences that gave her the sense she was staying in a king's palace. She slipped her body into the silken sheets and switched off the bedside lamp. "I can't ruin my sister's big day. I just can't," she told herself. "She is so incredibly happy. I've never seen her this happy before. Besides, the groom's family has spent such a fortune on this wedding. If I come along and tear everything apart, I'm not sure Izzy will ever forgive me for that." Soon Nola had fallen into a deep sleep. She awoke with a sudden start, having been badly prickled by the nudging of her conscience that whispered to her, "Tell her the truth, tell her the truth, tell her the truth." Sweat was pouring down Nola's forehead in immodest rivulets. It trickled down her back and across her upper lip. She dabbed her face with a hand towel, her heart pounding violently against her rib cage, while a sickly taste of a reluctant dread coated the back of her throat. It wouldn't be right for Izzy to go forward in this marriage, being blind-sighted. I have to tell her the truth. Pierce had met Nola under the fictitious name of Timothy Cox, along with a fake photograph. There is no telling how long he'd been playing these duplicitous charades, or indeed how many women he had picked up this way. It should have been a red flag to her from the very beginning. Timothy had plied her with alcohol to take advantage of her, so that in her oblivion she had awoken in his brownstone apartment. He was engaged to her sister Izzy when he'd hooked up with her, so it was very likely he would continue these deceptive shenanigans long after he'd married Izzy. Once a rat, always a rat. Nola's heart became heavy as she anticipated how her sister would react to her startling revelations. She knew she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. She'd be damned if she said anything, and damned if she didn't. Yet how could she live with herself if she didn't tell Izzy the truth? She may have been jealous of her sister Izzy, but never in a million years would she wish on her such grievous misfortune. Izzy was hopelessly in love with Piers, that was true, but she doubted the love was truly reciprocated. For if this man really loved Izzy like he claimed, he would not have been picking up women behind her back and cheating on her like this. I will be responsible for breaking up a fabulous wedding tomorrow, with a wrecking ball, with my own words, she thought. But I really haven't got a choice in the matter, have I? She reluctantly climbed out of bed. A soft prism of moonlight filtered through the open crack in the curtain, so that her room was doused in a silvery light. She grabbed her dressing gown and slippers that had been flung haphazardly over the plump upholstered ottoman. Her fingers trembled as she pushed her arms through the sleeve of the gown and knotted up the rope-like belt around her middle, while slipping her feet into velvety slippers that felt warm. She glanced at her bedside clock. It was 12:30 at night. Everyone knew brides needed their beauty sleep, and waking up Izzy at this god-forsaken time would not meet with an auspicious reception. She knew Izzy was sleeping in the large, grandiose bridal suite at the end of the corridor, with its flamboyant over-the-top king-sized four-poster bed, luxuriously decked out with the finest Egyptian linens. She was not sleeping with her fiancé tonight on the eve of her wedding. Nola felt like a blowfly drowning in a jar of syrup, drenched by the tangled stickiness of the choice she was forced to make. She gritted her teeth, bit her lip, and finally opened the door to her bedroom. The sleeping house was steeped in a tranquil silence. Everything was very still. The only noise was the pitter-patter of her slippered feet as they quietly glided down the lavish carpeted corridor. The window allowed the light of a full moon to magnanimously permeate the hallway. Finally she came to the door with a sign that read, "The McClare Bridal Suite," and she tried the door handle, pushing it down with her hands. She expected it to be locked, but to her amazement the door opened without so much as a creak. She tiptoed furtively towards her sister's bed. Her sister's svelte figure was swallowed up by a bed, easily the size of a small room. Izzy lay there, so peacefully swathed in the luxurious sheets, her blonde hair splayed over the pillows like a beautiful sleeping princess. Nola stared down at Izzy, her heart consumed with a vacillating reluctance. There was a big part of her that wanted to retreat out of the bedroom and forget all about this. All of a sudden her sister sat up, her blue eyes filled with terror. She was about to scream out, but when the moonlight washed over her sister's face from a crack in the curtain, her horrified face turned into an expression of infuriated astonishment. "What the hell, Nola? You scared me half to death! I woke up to see this figure crouching over me. I thought you were the bogey man. What the hell are you doing in my bedroom? I'm getting married tomorrow afternoon. I need my beauty sleep. I don't appreciate you sneaking up to me like this and waking me up like this in the middle of the night. What the hell has got into you?" Nola stumbled on her words, trying desperately to find them, but a fog developed in the back of her throat. Finally she managed to speak. It's about your fiancé. You can't possibly marry him. You just can't." "Oh my God! I had no idea you were this jealous, Nola. I've known you were afflicted by the green-eyed monster before, but this is insane. Of course I must marry Piers. I love him. More to the point, we love each other. Get over it, Nola, for God's sake. You're a big girl now. Surely you would not begrudge me a bit of happiness. I don't know how to tell you this, Izzy, but 2 weeks ago, after drinking too much in a bar, I ended up in bed with your fiancé. I woke up in his brownstone apartment. I never meant it to happen. I had no idea he was your fiancé at the time. I'm really sorry. You what? Asked Izzy, growling. You what? Say that again. You heard me. 2 weeks ago I met up with a man on Tinder who claimed to be a chap called Timothy Cox. He had a very pleasing profile, a very attractive photograph, and no thanks to my friend Alison, I accepted a date with him. When my date arrived, he looked nothing like his online profile. The photograph was not the same as the person. Instead, he was actually much better looking than the photograph. I commented that his photograph was different, and he just waved it off. He told me that his secretary, who had been helping him with his Tinder profile, had put on the wrong picture by mistake, but the right name, which sounded a bit absurd to me. Now I realise after meeting your fiancé, both were false. Your peers ploughed me with too much champagne. I'm ashamed to say that the next morning I found myself lying naked in his bed, at his brownstone apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I had no memory of getting there, or even the events of that evening. I felt so filthy, so cheap, such self-revulsion. But I was responsible for my inebriation. I can't exactly blame that on him. Nevertheless, it didn't stop your fiancé, this so-called perfect gentleman, from taking advantage of me in my bladdered state. Izzy stared at her sister, her face growing white and then crimson. Her teeth began to grind in her jaw. 2 weeks ago, you mean? You went on a date with my peers? Is that what you're telling me? And he pretended to be this Timothy Cox fellow? Nola nodded. I'm so sorry, Izzy. I didn't want to tell you. I really didn't. I don't know what to say. We've been together for 2 years, and he does this to me. I'll kill him, she growled. I'll bloody kill him. Why would he do this to me? Do those sound like the actions of a man committed to his spouse? It's a bloody joke. Nola nodded. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The tears spilled down her cheeks. You are right, Izzy. I am jealous of you. I always have been. You're beautiful. You're clever. You're successful. But I'd never wish this on you, never. I just wish I could tell you something different. I didn't want to tell you this. In truth, I got the shock of my life when I actually saw your peers, because I recognised him as Timothy Cox, and that he was your fiancé. He also recognised me at once and became incredibly uncomfortable. I bet he bloody did, said Izzy. I bet he did, treacherous little liar. I bloody hate him. To think I was going to marry him tomorrow. Am I a fool or what? Have I got cauliflower for brains? I mean, he's always telling me he's working late, or he has to go away on a conference for a few days. Sometimes I was suspicious, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. My guess is he's been hooking up with girls on Tinder under this fake profile for a very long time. And that's how he gets away with it. What a jerk! Izzy leapt out of bed. She looked furious. There was no telling what she was going to do. Izzy, why don't we go for a walk together? Nola hurriedly suggested. There's a full moon out there. It's lovely in the wood grove. We could take some champagne out there, a couple of glasses and talk. You don't want to do anything rash. We can talk it through together. Tomorrow you can decide whether you want to call off your wedding or not. Call it off? Of course I'm going to bloody call it off, Nola. There's no way I'm marrying that jerk. What a loser! Nola pulls out her cell phone from her dressing gown. Look here, she says, showing her sister a picture of Timothy Cox that she had responded to. The profile still remained on Twitter. Oh my God, gasped Izzy, staring at the profile on the cell phone. I can't believe he did this to me. You know what, sis? I think I should take you up on your idea. Let's go for a walk in the wood grove, like you suggest, or I don't know what I'm going to do. We can take a bottle of champagne with us. There is no way I can get back to sleep after what you've told me. Besides, it'll be fun taking a walk under a full moon. Nola was surprised that Izzy had reacted to the news about her fiancé's philandering ways better than she could have envisaged. She wondered if deep down in her sister's gut there was a knowing rooted in the pit of her stomach that told her something was off about her relationship with Piers. She had often heard that people sometimes knew things that they refused to acknowledge to themselves, as they didn't want to admit them to be true. The two women stealthily crept down the sweeping staircase and headed towards the large state-of-the-art kitchen, where Izzy removed a bottle of the finest French champagne, along with a couple of champagne flutes from the cold storage area. Then, armed with a couple of flashlights, they trudged over to the well-oiled front door. Soon they were greeted by friendly, spirited gusts of fresh air, filled with the scent of jasmine and lilacs, while the trills of crickets and frogs serenaded the night with their joyful choruses. The two sisters nimbly ambled along the moist, dewy grass that brushed against their sweats. The white marquee was parked so elegantly on the lawn, and was prettily dappled by the glistening moonlit shadows. Nola had been in a woods at night before, but not here at this particular wedding venue, and being out in the woods in the middle of the night gave her an irrational thrill. There was something so bewitching, so beguiling, about the way the ethereal, almost haunting shafts of moonlight danced buoyantly through the canopy of the trees. The trees themselves seemed to whisper as they jiggled in the breeze, their boughs thrashing around noisily, while their leaves rustled. Izzy stopped dead in her tracks. "Did you hear that, Nola?" "Hear what?" "Shh! Listen," said Nola, putting a finger on her lips. "There's someone else in the woodgrove whistling. I've never heard anyone whistle like that before. Such a beautiful tune." Izzy hurriedly put down the champagne and the glasses, throwing them casually against an old oak tree. She quickly grabbed her sister's hands. "Come, let's go and see who it is. Aren't you curious? But we need to be quiet." The two girls crept furtively through the trees, like FBI agents moving towards a suspicious target. The girls switched off their torches and moved closer and closer towards the sound. Izzy put her fingers on her lips again. "Look, can you see it? It's over there. It's absolutely humongous." "You must be very quiet. We don't want it to know we're here." In a soft opening through the trees, the moonlight bounced over an ambiguously obscure silhouette, caressing ponderous shoulders, overlong arms, and a humanoid figure that was covered in long flowing hair and was easily over 7 foot tall. "It's a Bigfoot," whispered Nola excitedly. "It's a Bigfoot." The Bigfoot was clearly female, as she had breasts. She was whistling a pretty tune, and appeared to be bending down on the forest floor, with her sizable hands brushing away leaves and twigs, as if looking for something that she had dropped. But very suddenly she looked up, reminding Nola of a dog when its ears perk up, as if she'd heard something. Then all of a sudden the deep-set, dark, treacle-coloured eyes spinned towards the trees, where Nola and her sister were hiding. She ambled towards them in a straight trajectory. How could she have heard them? They had been so terribly quiet. Nola wanted to run away as fast as she possibly could. While she was curious and intrigued about this mysterious Bigfoot, a personal encounter with such an intimidating beast was not something that she would gladly welcome. The two sisters clutched each other tightly, and Nola's bladder burst as a warm liquid descended down her legs. She had never been this afraid before. She wanted to run away, but her legs failed to oblige her. She felt like a tree rooted to the spot, unable to move. Her legs had become like heavy concrete blocks. She winced in pain as Izzy's long fingernails clawed into her skin so hard that Nola was sure she had drawn blood. Her mind was screaming, "For God's sake, run! What the hell is wrong with you?" Her body began to shake involuntarily like a leaf, and suddenly all the blood drained away from her face. She became so light-headed that she fainted and passed out, collapsing under the tree. The Bigfoot stood there, tall and majestic, staring at Izzy. But when Izzy saw her beautiful brown eyes, all her former fear dissipated. The Bigfoot quickly dashed over to Nola and began to slap her cheeks. But when Nola opened her eyes, she found herself staring up into a Bigfoot's face. She became so consumed with terror that she passed out again. The creature slapped her cheeks, and a voice screamed into her head, "I'm not going to hurt you. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm very sorry." This time Nola's eyes opened, and she looked up into the most beautiful eyes she'd ever seen. All her fears dissipated as the Bigfoot helped her to her feet. Nola noticed that Izzy was staring at the Bigfoot with a transfixed expression on her face, as if she was completely beguiled by the creature. All of a sudden the Bigfoot looked directly at Izzy, as if she'd been reading her thoughts. She put her hand on her heart and spoke to Izzy in a strange language. "Itantuakisa, hofokoshanasipa, igana silapo." Be glad he got away. Some things are not meant to be. Let your anger go. The words were translated into the girls' heads in English, and they stared at the Bigfoot with bemused expressions. "I don't understand. You're talking about Piers. How can you know about him?" "Itantuasifo, ishakatala putonola, isafolobojona." "Your mind is an open book to me," said the Bigfoot. "I can read it easily. But let your anger go, for you will be glad you did so. For do not curse the grace of the universe. It has your best interests at heart." It was good to meet you both. Then she was gone, just like that. Both girls were left staring at each other bewildered, saying, "Did that really happen?" Even years later, that event seemed so surreal to them, but happen it did. And just like the Bigfoot had said, Izzy let it go. The following morning she told Piers, "I'm sorry, I can't marry you." There were no tantrums, no accusations, no shenanigans. It would seem Izzy's encounter with the Bigfoot had helped her end her relationship with a graceful dignity. When people questioned her decision to call off the wedding, she shrugged her shoulders and said, "Some things are not meant to be," and that was that. Izzy was to meet the love of her life 18 months after her breakup with Piers, and she claims she owes the stoic way she handled her relationship with Piers to the wisdom of a Bigfoot. "I don't know how to explain it to you," she said. "That Bigfoot was so incredibly wise. She knew things about me and about my life path. She explained that I should let it go, and what was never meant to be was just not meant to be. You would be wise to do the same, for the universe will open doors for you that need to be open, and shut the ones you were never meant to walk through. So there you are. That's my story." Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.